Biotechnology is a big deal. And when it comes to biotech, the technology part involves not just medicine, but involves data, predictive analytics, and a host of computing power doing all kinds of interesting things. And today, on episode number 123 of CXOTalk, we are joined by, and my co-host Vala Afshar. I'm Michael Krigsman, and my co-host is Vala Afshar, and Vala should introduce our guest. Hey, Vala, how are you? How do you like that for kind of a convoluted introduction?
Yeah, it's only episode 123.
I know, one of these days we're going to kind of nail it.
We are. You know what it is, Michael? I think both of us are a little bit nervous because we have an extraordinary guest on the show. I know I'm nervous.
That's it.
And last time we had Andi Karaboutis on our show. She was the CIO of Dell, and I remember for 45 minutes I couldn't tweet fast enough because all the signs she dropped on us. So I'm anticipating the same thing today, where Andi Karaboutis, EVP of Technology and Business Solutions from Biogen, is joining us. Hi, Andi. How are you?
Good, Vala. How are you? It's a pleasure to be back.
Thank you so much for being back. And if you wouldn't mind, Andi, maybe you can share with us a little bit about your professional background so our audience can learn more about you.
Absolutely. So I started my academic life and career, if you will, in Detroit. I spent 20 years in the auto industry, 15 years at Ford Motor Company and 6 at General Motors, a tremendous industry where I learned a lot about technology and manufacturing. I then went to Dell in Austin, Texas, a little bit warmer than Boston, Massachusetts, I would say, and joined another great institution called Dell, and I was the Global Chief Information Officer for about 3 years. And just last September, I took a pretty big leap, moved to Boston, and joined the biotechnology industry, and I'm now with Biogen, one of the oldest biotechnology companies, and a leader in neurodegenerative, hematologic, and autoimmune disease therapeutics. And I'm having an absolute blast, drinking from a fire hose and learning a ton.
So Biogen is quite a large company. Your revenue is about $10 billion.
Correct.
Per year. So
yes.
give us a sense of the kinds of technologies that are involved with biotech.
Absolutely. So there is the technology, if you think of biotechnology, which is the use of living systems and organisms to develop products and therapeutics, and in our case for a lot of orphan diseases like multiple sclerosis, which is very specialized diseases, I would say. Our scientists and research groups use a lot of technology to work with the molecular biology and down at the cell level, where you can imagine, I mean, you're down into nano, sorts of technology. So a tremendous amount there within research. Within the last few years, if you think about the capabilities that have emerged, genetic sequencing, being able to get data and insights on protein and proteomics and metabolomics and all those things that are now available to us to gain more insight about a disease and disease states, all of that, Michael, has generated plethora in terms of data that now we can start using, and if I look at it at the macro level, to actually try to accelerate the drug discovery process. Bringing a drug to market takes 10 to 15 years as we sit here and speak, from start, in the research labs, for looking at the disease state, all the way through to maybe potentially going on the market. Technology and disruptive technologies can now help in a number of states or a number of processes along the way to help reduce that time and to help target even more therapeutics or target more end states that we can develop therapeutics for.
So Andi, you leave Dell and you join a smaller company, even though we're talking 10 billion in revenue, and you're talking about accelerating, bringing drugs to market, and just capturing all this analytics and being actively part of the discovery process. What are some of the changes that you're experiencing at Biogen as compared to when you were, CIO of Dell?
So I think the biggest change is, for me personally, it was obviously learning about biotechnology and what the industry is about. Going from the auto industry to the technology industry was a leap. Going from both of those to the biotechnology or biopharma industry is a huge leap. So voila, I had to start with 2 atoms, make a molecule, and start learning from there and really understanding. Because as you know, any great technology head, and I have a lot of those as peers in the industry, you have to understand the core business of the company. And that includes what is being done, how the business is run, how the regulatory and compliance groups work, etc. The other big difference is, although the tools and the systems around enterprise IT to run a company are all very similar. You've got your ERPs, your MRPs, your CRMs for customer relationship management, the enterprise resource and material replenishment, etc. But when you're in an industry like this and the remit is much bigger, and you're now looking at how do we do computational biology, bioinformatics, that is specific to this industry. And many would say, oh, that's big data. You really do need to understand the interdisciplinary processes of biology, information technology, and computer science, because it's at those crosshairs where you can really start helping, the researchers and, our PhD scientists to do drug discovery and find the right targets to actually, find molecules and therapeutics for.
Andi, we want to definitely drill down and talk about these things, but you're responsible for technology and business solutions. So to help set the context, give us a sense of what your organization encompasses.
So I have a set of groups. There's three big groups that are under my remit in technology and business solutions. The first is enterprise IT, which is the core IT capabilities for the company that handles the taxonomy of the business, everywhere from research, all development, manufacturing, process manufacturing, etc., all the way to patient services and worldwide medical, etc. So if you think of the taxonomy of the business, our enterprise IT owns and runs that, and I'm pleased to say I just appointed a new CIO, Matt Griffiths, who was also at Dell with me, and Matt assumed the position of CIO just a few months ago and is running that. The second big group is what I call the Global Data Office, and the Global Data Office has computer scientists, biologists, chemists, PhD researchers, and people that have worked on informatics, computer science, biology together to help our researchers with the modeling, the capabilities, and even things like how do we have compute connectivity and storage, dynamically provisioned so we can run the various experiments and research that we need. So the Global Data Office handles the spectrum from analytics all the way up to computational biology or bioinformatics. And that's a new group that we just established in this past year working with our researchers. It's not only limited to research, we are also running programs to try and understand our patients, our therapeutics. Things like, and you'll recognize these names, value-based medicine, personalized medicine, stratification of the patients so we can see which therapeutics are better for which patients. The data that's out there, Michael and Vala, is unbelievable. And historically, we were at the mercy of researching, pulling, just more tactical measures. Now we're trying to build modeling, et cetera, to really help us understand everything from research all the way to our patients' insights. The third big group is digital health tech. And I say big because I mean big impact, right? And digital health tech, to put it in simple terms, if you think about all of the plethora of devices that are out there, wearables and the Band-Aid that attaches that can read skin sensitivities and all the various things, They provide insights. And we're looking into that so we can understand everything from, the life of a patient between visits to a doctor that would provide potential insight, to a provider or to us, obviously very anonymously driven, and these are all hypotheticals and things that we're trying to make into programs, if you will. So it's all three of those. It's enterprise IT, it is the global data office, and digital health technology, which is a feed into the data office.
Andi, are there some unique challenges that you could share with us since you joined, I believe, September of 2014? What are some of the unique challenges in biotech that are new to you as compared to when working at Dell, for example?
So I think some of the unique challenges are, first of all, there's cultural differences, and the industry is different in that really sharing with the biotech organization what the things are that we can do with technology. So when you work at Dell, you have a number of people that fully understand technology. When you work in a biotech, you have a lot of people that understand biology, molecular biology, et cetera, and some technology. So really educating on what are the disruptive technologies we can use, and how are there some of the models that we can do in order to help tie, for example, genomic sequences, genomic data with proteomic, metabolomic, and things like that to really come up with insights. The second big challenge, and I'd say it's more of an opportunity than a challenge, is we're doing a lot of partnering. And partnering with research organizations, Columbia University, for example, Harvard, et cetera, and some other organizations in order to be able to pull together things in consortium and to be able to move the industry forward. So the opportunities are things that you educate a lot on.
So you were CIO at Dell, and now being CIO is a part of your organization's responsibility. Is there a linkage or a pathway from being from your previous role as CIO to what you're doing now? What is that path, and what are the connections?
You know, Michael, it's a continuum. I know, a lot of people say, oh, CIO, or this is CIO plus, or, et cetera. Technology is, and this is a cliche phrase, but it is ubiquitous, right? And so you start moving with technology and the recognition of opportunities that it can help disrupt or drive, and all of a sudden more opportunities come. So for example, we weren't looking at digital health technologies at Dell. We're looking at that here. Data, we provided a lot of platforms that would help with data. Dell had some great products and still does around that. This is now about how do you get those insights into the hands of scientists and things like that. The patient, payer, provider, and external. So it's a continuum where you're reaching further and further outside the company and impacting the consumer of the products of the company as opposed to running the internals of the company. And I think, to quote Steve Jobs, in this industry, the biggest disruption in this century is really around the marriage of technology and biology. And so I would say it's a continuum, and it keeps getting bigger what the opportunities are.
Andi, we have a question from Twitter from Frank Scavo, who is a top enterprise software industry analyst. And he's wondering, are the systems that manage clinical trials under your jurisdiction, your department?
So we have a lot of outsourced opportunities in that. So clinical trials are typically run by our CROs. And so companies, for example, Quintiles, et cetera. But they have their systems, and we have systems that interface with them. And by the way, they're not an exclusive CRO for us, but an example.
Great. Andi, you're both a technologist and a business person. Can you tell us a bit about how those two intersect and the importance of that in terms of being a digital change agent?
Yeah, they intersect very well, Vala, and they're mandatory. being a business person and a technologist is mandatory if you're going to succeed. I'm on the management team at Biogen, and if in fact you don't understand the strategy of the company, the balance sheet of the company, the goals of the company, and you're trying to drive disruption and help the company realize those goals and objectives, you're kind of flying with a blinder on. So when I was at Ford, I spent 6 years in the core business, as IT people would say, and it was actually one of the best opportunities I had because you see things from a non-technology or IT perspective. Now being part of the management team, understanding the business and all of those capabilities, balance sheets and all the rest, you're able to actually influence and say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to do this to achieve these objectives. And you're actually having those more forward-thinking discussions. So it's mandatory. I don't think any CIO who doesn't truly, viscerally understand the business is going to be successful. And I don't mean the business from a future state reference architecture, but having been out there, whether it's on the field, whether it's on the road, etc. I personally have been on the road with our sales teams visiting hospitals, providers, etc., to really understand how we do our processes, and have been in our labs as well.
So what does the business expect from you?
Several things. First, efficient enterprise and everyday tools. Those are not trite. It's very unsexy for some people would think, but the reality is you still have to run a very efficient and reliable enterprise. That's one. The second is insights, and I would say that's probably the biggest thing they're looking at by bringing myself in, who's worked in a tech company, etc., in a broader remit, is how are you going to help us bring the insights so that we can help the drug discovery process, the drug development process, and the drug commercialization process. How do we cut time out of our therapeutic development, etc.? And then new disruptive technologies. I took my leadership team to Babson College not too long ago, about in the last couple of months, and we went through a session with Babson, which is obviously a big entrepreneurial school, about how do we think entrepreneurially in an industry and in a company that's highly regulated. But we want to help with those processes we talked about. So they're expecting a lot of insights and a lot of opportunity for me to bring to the table. How do we marry technology to help this company achieve its goals?
Andy, a couple of weeks ago we had David Cohen, who's the co-founder of Techstars, Startup Accelerator. And Techstars, they've helped 200 some odd companies raise nearly $2 billion in venture capital. And I was surprised to hear that they're working with Nike, with Disney, with Microsoft, Qualcomm. He named a bunch of Fortune 500, Fortune 250 companies in terms of helping identify potential disruptive technologies. You mentioned going to Babson. Does your team work with startups to better understand and stay ahead of what might be disruptive technology you can use within Biogen?
Absolutely. So completely, we do, Vala. And I will tell you, I was at 2 venture capital companies in California in the last few months, looking at probably a total of 15 startups. I just came back from England, where I visited with a VC company in London and also the Sanger Genomic Institute out in Cambridge. We're talking to a number of universities, UCSF, Columbia, Harvard, obviously MIT right across the street from us. So the opportunity for partnerships and different kinds of partnerships and seeing what's out there is probably, I would say, one of the first things, or maybe second thing after understanding the strategy of the company that we've been doing. And it's constant. It's not going out there once. Things are changing. Startups are coming up. And we have a lot of companies and individuals coming to us with great and interesting ideas. We're also part of the MIT Media Lab, which is an unbelievable organization, stemmed toward things that are out there in multiple industries. And I'm proud to say that, while we're looking in our own industry, we're looking to learn from other industries as well, because a lot of disruption and opportunities emerge from there as well. So completely all over it, I would say.
So,
Awesome.
so do you see startups as a kind of external opportunity for innovation or source of innovation that you can then ultimately bring back into Biogen, or how do you view your relationship with
It's a
startups?
source of innovation from the perspective of ideas, from the perspective of partnerships, and potentially other, sorts of engagements. But we absolutely see startups that way. We see academia as a huge source of innovation and information. Startups, consortiums, various groups. So we're what I call a 360-degree view. We will turn down nothing. We also believe postdocs and things like that, individuals that we bring in are a wealth of information. So marrying that all together is, I think, what's going to help us really propel forward into continued success at Biogen.
I want to mention some of our previous guests. We had John Halamka, CIO at Harvard Beth Israel, and so do you work with CIOs in the healthcare industry and collaborate with them in order to, again, ensure innovation and better understanding of disruptive tech as it relates to Biogen?
Yeah, we Matt is on my CIO here at Biogen is on PISA, which is the Pharmaceutical consortium where we come together, biotechs and pharma companies. Very active group. I'm very pleased to say that the technologists in this industry really do talk, collaborate, work together. We're all in different therapeutic areas. There's some overlap, so information exchange amongst the technology group is really good.
Terrific.
It's really good.
Do you have formal innovation programs at Biogen? Again, and what I'm trying to do is sort of understand how the startups fit in with your internal innovation efforts.
So we've done some partnerships. Some are public. We've done a partnership with Google on patients, MS patients, and getting insights. They're certainly not a startup, but we have done that. Look, innovation, and Michael, you know this from the last time we spoke, although there's some people in multiple groups at Biogen that have innovation in the title, we don't have one chief innovation officer. We have, because we believe innovation comes from, everywhere and should, right? It's how you define it, how you harness it, how you actually develop it. We've got a number of partnerships. I wish I could talk more about it. I can't. I apologize. But yes, startups, companies like Google, which we have announced, organizations like Columbia, which we have announced. But watch this space.
Awesome. We will. We definitely will. Andy, you mentioned the space is ripe for digital disruption, and you also talked about bringing drug to market can be 10 to 15 years. So perhaps part of the efforts of disrupting this industry is to accelerate discovery and bringing drugs to market. But can you talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say ripe for disruption?
So ripe for disruption is more about the insights, Vala, right? Mm-hmm. So we have not equipped historically in this industry our scientists with the tools to be able to do, I'll call it in tactical terms, the research and get the insights that they should be getting in a much quicker manner, right? So doing research, finding targets could take weeks and months. With the right horsepower, with the right modeling, we should be able to find targets to go after, and what I mean is molecular targets, if you will, to go after in hours and days. And that's exactly what we've done through implementing, we have a research cloud, and again, we've pulled together informatics people with our biologists and computational biology to get those insights quicker.
And what are the challenges in making this happen? Because on the surface, it seems like bringing more horsepower to the problem seems pretty obvious, and yet there must be challenges, deep challenges associated with it, or you wouldn't be talking about it in terms of the challenge of disruption.
Yeah, so the horsepower is the easy part, but it's the price of admission. You've got to have dynamic cloud, compute power, and connectivity, right? We are actually part of the Internet 2 consortium with 280 other universities or academic institutions where, you know, we share information and we're able to use that compute power. But that's the easier part. The tougher part is accumulating the data that you need. We've got PubMed data. We've got our own clinical trial data. We've got genomic data. If you know, I mean, obviously several years ago you couldn't do genomic sequencing within a reasonable amount of time or budget. Now we've got all that. The challenge is bringing that all together and really doing the modeling to create the insights. And it's, I say challenge, it's not a hurdle, but it's a huge opportunity on how quickly we can do that with, you know, our constituents, the interdisciplinary constituents we talked about, in order to gain those insights. So let me give you a real example, Michael. Study of disease. So if you look at the drug development process, 4 steps, just at a very high level. You want to study the disease itself that you're looking at, right? Then you want to pick a target, or you want to pick a molecule that you either want to treat, you want to impair, you want to prevent, etc. Okay. Think of that step 2. Step 3 is picking a drug or a therapeutic, and step 4 is developing that. And by the way, 95% of drug or target that you're treating, those drugs never make it to market. So it's a very iterative process. But if you think about studying the disease itself, you're studying, is it a genetic, you know, defect or something in the genes that causes a disease? Is it environmental? Is it infectious? What is that? Well, that means you've got genetic data, you could have protein data, you can have metabolic data, you could have environmental data, you can have geographic data, data, right? That poses one of the biggest big data problems, but we need to be able to pull that in and be able to find those intersection points so that it's not sort of, you know, darts as to this is what we think this disease could be. It's much more successful in that focus. And that's the big opportunity here.
Can you, Andy, I mean, okay, so you've mentioned so far, you know, wearables, you know, we obviously Internet of Things and sensors and ingestibles, and, you know, clearly anything that can be connected will be, and there's going to be oceans of data that hopefully folks like yourself can convert to insights that lead to rapid decisions and actions and ultimately value to an end user, a customer, or an employee. How are you thinking about all of this? I mean, are you recruiting differently? Are you looking for data scientists to bring into IT? Are you you know, setting up innovation labs within Biogen, for example, with wearables to get a sense of how to integrate all of that into an, you know, into the enterprise and healthcare institution? You know, can you talk to us about how you think about all of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Vala. So first off, when we think about this, we start with what's the question we're trying to answer. So it's really easy to have people say, look at this great watch, you know, and we've looked at Intel, we've looked at Google, we've looked at Apple, we've looked at Samsung, we look at all of them because they're all in their own right, you know, successful. But what's the question we're trying to answer? So for instance, for multiple sclerosis patients, you know, multiple sclerosis patients can go into doctors every 6 months for a checkup. But what's happening in between those visits? If some form of device, and I won't say it's a watch or an implantable or something, but some device that reads the motion of the patient and is able to actually signal when a patient is, the gait has gone off, which is indicative of progressive, you know, of MS, moving on to a next state, then these devices should be able to tell us. So the question potentially, for instance, we try to answer is, how do we manage and help our providers and also get insights on patients in between those visits to understand how therapeutics could be working and whatnot? And then we move that inward and we work on the problem. Relative to who we recruit in IT, in the global data office, and in digital health tech, it is very different to where I might have been recruiting before, in the auto industry or at Dell, because now I'm looking for people that actually have a background in science and computing. Very difficult to find, but out there. And we're in the hotbed of technology here, I'm pleased to say, with MIT and various schools around us. And I think, Bella, you and Michael obviously know that. But it is a very specific skill set. Informatics, biology, computer science, MIS as well, information systems. So we are looking for those specialists.
So Andi, when you talk about the skill sets and the competencies required to do this kind of work, clearly you are mixing people with very different backgrounds, people from traditional technology backgrounds, mixed with medicine, mixed with biology and chemistry, and so forth. So from a management standpoint, how do you drive collaboration among these groups of people who have different training, different goals? This must be a core component of what you do, I would imagine.
I spend a lot of time on building teams, the relationship, talking about teamwork and whatnot. Michael, at the core, we're driving teams that value velocity versus speed, which means we're all going in the same direction and hopefully increasing speed as we go. But it's more important we all understand the North Star, where we're going, and we drive velocity over speed. We drive valuing each other's skill sets, because although I just described the phenotype of the perfect person that understands chemistry, biology, computer science, etc., you get variation of strength of those skills in various people, and they have to respect each other's capabilities, and so the teamwork, etc., is very important. The third dimension is we are a highly regulated industry, and we're a company that absolutely respects and, I'm very proud to say, is very much within the letter of making sure we're doing everything as we should for the drug discovery development process. But that doesn't preclude a spirit of entrepreneurialism and innovation. So that's the other dimension that I'm building teams to drive. And we have to think that way. Just because it was no, we can't historically, we start with, well, how do we get to where we can get insights from patients but still absolutely value anonymity and HIPAA regulations? And so that's how we're thinking of those things, and we're building teams to work together to do that. Clarity around roles and responsibilities is as important here as anywhere. And, the North Star of the goals of where we're trying to achieve. All of that together is building the high-performance team that we need to really achieve the goals for technology and business solutions.
So, Andi, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I have two girls. They're 12 and 9. Knock on wood, both are strong in math and so far doing really well in school. And the older one is starting to ask me about engineering. Her dad's a double E. And so what advice can I give to my 12-year-old and my 9-year-old girls about, studying technology and science and someday aspiring to reach, the incredible success that you've had?
Well, thank you, Vala. So I think the key thing is tying it to the outcomes. Right? A lot of times we parents, I've done it as well, and I have 2 sons, but I've done it as well, said, technology, math, analytics, the numbers, really important, etc. But when you tie it to, see that patient over there, we're able to tell if they're getting better or worse because we can see data, or their providers can see data from it. And we actually help with that. It's tying it to the outcome. That would be the first thing I would say, Vala. The second thing is sometimes girls, we sometimes think, and I think probably a lot of people, but I would say it's more endemic in girls, because something is hard, we don't like it. And that's not the case, right? Try it, drive hard, and you can develop passion for it and really try to study it. I think showing the results of what technology can do is important. The third thing is really showing and demonstrating, look, technology is everywhere. It is in every industry. from the automobile that's also become your travel advisor because it's telling you which way to go, and it's become your concierge, to it's become etc., all the way to my world of ingestibles and wearables, etc., that are monitoring the internet of me, right? So it's ubiquitous. And for anybody to some level that doesn't believe studying the sciences, technology, engineering, maths, and things that kind of come to the core of that, you're really excluding a lot of what you can do going forward because it is so ubiquitous.
Terrific advice.
Andi, continuing on this topic, you've been extremely successful in a succession of very large companies. And we hear about a glass ceiling. Have you ever experienced a glass ceiling? And if so, how have you been able to break through that glass ceiling?
Yeah. So, Michael, I honestly have not. And I'm not saying this because I believe I should say this. From Ford, General Motors, Dell, and now here at Biogen, and those are my personal experiences. I have not experienced that glass ceiling, but I will tell you, I think a lot has to do with the mindset that I've gone in with, which is I've gone in with what are the problems we're trying to solve, what are the challenges, what are the goals we're trying to meet, versus how many women are in the room, etc. By the way, you do think of that because you want to build diverse teams, but you don't think of that as you're going into an organization with the mindset of how do I contribute the absolute most I can. And when you do that, the opportunities present themselves. So I'm not saying that others haven't. I don't want to discount what could be real situations of people bumping into glass ceilings. I've just found that I haven't, and I think I've been very fortunate, but I've also gone in with the mindset, as I said before, of what are we trying to do? And let's go do it.
So are you saying a results-oriented mindset can help be more inclusive and cultivate a culture of diversity?
Yes. Results-oriented, focus on the goal, right? Focus on the goal, because even if you're in an innovative environment where you fail fast, you might not get the results, but you're focusing on, okay, how do we course correct? Where do we go? So it is focusing on that North Star of where is it the company's going, what's my part in getting the company there, playing my position, both in the technology, for example, and as part of a management team, and how do I enable my team to do the same thing? If you keep that maniacal focus, I think the results, really start coming, and the sky's the limit.
Now, you are also on the board of directors of Advance Auto Parts, and when we think of auto parts and car repair and car enthusiasts, clearly this is yet another very heavily male-dominated industry, and you're on their board. So tell us about that.
So I am absolutely thrilled to be on the board of Advanced Auto Parts. I just joined. I announced I think late last year and started this year. And it's a very diverse board. I'm not the only female on the board. We have another female on the board, and we've got a plethora of diversity on it. And it is, for me, I smile, Michael, when you ask that, because it helps me keep one foot in the auto industry, which I really still have a big passion for. But it's fantastic. It is, once again, I find it to be a team of people that are focusing on the goals that we need to get to, and are very, very thoughtful group of people talking about how do we do it, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and we all keep an eye toward the greater good of that company.
So you're just one of the guys, so to speak.
I'm one of the board members.
Okay.
Andi, last week we had Graham Hacklin, who's a CIO of Williams Racing. So I'm going to bring up cars. 18 years in Formula One racing. And when I asked him for advice, he said temperament is important. When he builds and recruits within his organization, the grind and the grit and the real-time nature of race day And he talked about a car with 200 sensors, 1,000 channels of data. He said in one race they can produce 150 gig of data, and his team is responsible for providing the insights to the cockpit, the crew team, and so on and so forth. So what advice do you have? Is temperament also important in biotech when you're surrounded by PhDs and scientists, and as a technologist you're trying to convince them to perhaps adopt a new way of doing things using new technology? Do you agree that temperament is also very important?
Look, yeah, I think in general, absolutely, temperament is very important. I will say, though, it's interesting because the PhDs and our scientists are very open to it. It's around, my bringing it to them, explaining value, and working together. But I think temperament is very important. For me, the most important thing is continuing to bring the ideas and leadership, making sure everybody's going in the same direction. Because quite often, we have teams, I liken this to the analogy of the high-performing teams, the flock of geese, right? They're all going in the same direction, and they're flying, and they together do course corrections for headwinds. You don't see a goose flying off in the other direction, right? For me, that would probably be for in this industry, and I would say even in others, the most important. But temperament certainly is as well. Interesting, Vala. Think of that car with all the sensors and reading all of the levels and everything. Draw the analogy to a human being and what we can do from a technical perspective, right? Absolutely. And so, while two very different industries. This is where I draw a lot of parallels on what we can do to be able to read and get data and get to personalized medicine. That's going to be a big disruption for technology to support.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I think one of the real, I talk to a lot of CIOs all the time, and one of the common challenges that a CIO or a technologist faces in business is learning how to communicate strategically with business counterparts so that that person gets a seat at the table. And you're somebody who does have that seat at the table, and so what advice do you have for technologists who want that, who want to be part of that strategic partnering and decision-making process?
That is so key, Michael. Look, I'll tell you the exact analogy I tell my entire team. Whatever you do, do not start talking about photosynthesis first. When we communicate to our business partners, here's the planet, here's the continent, here's the country, here's the forest, here's the tree, there's the branch, there's the leaf, there's photosynthesis. As technologists, we start talking at the photosynthesis level, and sometimes you don't even need to get to that level. So I'm really strong about start with what problem we're helping this company solve or what goal we're trying to achieve, and work your way very quickly down to. I've even been known to, and my team would tell you, tailor the presentation with you will start with a goal and what you expect out of this presentation or meeting and go from there. And it keeps people out of saying things like the SOA layer and the third non-maskable interrupt code that ...
That was a fantastic analogy. You started, what was it, Earth, continent, country?
The planet, yes.
Planet, yeah. Yes. That was awesome. That was great. It's common sense. It's so true. It's so true.
So speak English. Is that paraphrasing?
Yeah. Start with the big picture and have people follow you down the road, right? And speak English. And sometimes you just need to get to the tree, not down to photosynthesis. So
start with the big picture, be clear, and know the audience to which you're talking.
Yeah, I also say no fluff, but that's the subject of a whole other CXO talk. I can tell you about fluff.
It's funny you say that. I just tweeted a memo from Elon Musk to his employees where he was begging them to stop using acronyms.
Yes.
And he said the only time you should use an acronym if it actually helps improve the understanding And even then, just please stop using acronyms. And
Yeah.
I so love that memo.
Yeah, Vala, it's so funny you should say that because even earlier in this presentation here, I said CRM, ERP, and MRP, and I went back and said what those were because I thought I sound like somebody I don't want to sound like.
Well, you were brilliant. As I said at the beginning of the show, I had a tough time keeping up with Twitter, and not many guests challenged me with respect to sharing on Twitter. So thank you so much for, again, being an extraordinary guest on CXOTalk.
Thank you, Vala. Thank you both for having me.
Yes, this has been fantastic. We have been talking with Andi Karaboutis, who is the Executive Vice President for Technology and Business Solutions at Biogen, a $10 billion revenue biotech company. This has been episode number 123. I am Michael Krigsman. My co-host is Vala Afshar. And Vala, we learned a lot about biotech during this last 45 minutes.
I cannot wait to summarize this in hopefully less than 4,000-word blog.
And Andi, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And everybody watching, come next week. But first, please subscribe to our mailing list. You'll see the link there. It says subscribe. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.